and welcome back to the Baseball Development Hub podcast. My name is Trevor Powers, and I am joined today by a very special guest. We have Will Barker, who is the Newtforce Lab Director. Will, it's been a long time coming. We've probably been talking about doing this for months at this point, and we talk every week. So I'm excited to get you on the podcast here to dive in some of what you guys do with Newtforce.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me on, and this is going to be really cool to actually be able to talk about, all the stuff that we've been talking about personally and, get into all the things that are going on with Newt Force and baseball development.
Yeah, well, you're one of the best in the business because you get to learn from all these coaches and obviously installations and picking the pitching coaches' brains about what they want and the product that you guys have rolled out to me. I mean, just from my experience of continuing to learn about what you guys do on the player development side, like just have become a bigger and bigger fan by the week, right? And I think your story with the Newtforce product is very fascinating because your dad had started, and we were just talking, and you were in high school when he had built the OG mound, the original mound. Talk about your perspective on the journey of where you guys and you specifically have gotten to this point when it pertains to the Newtforce product and the development of what impacts so many college programs.
Yeah, for sure. So I definitely have a unique perspective on Newt Force that not many people got to see. So my dad, Kyle, started Newt Force back when I was in high school, maybe 2016. So I was a junior in high school at the time. I remember going out to the shop several times, like I was telling you off air, and he was, personally putting together the mounds at that point. So I remember helping him with that stuff, sanding down materials, making cut sheets for him and things like that. All the way up until now, obviously doing a lot of the education, running our lab, and teaching people how to actually use the data to make baseball players better. So it's really unique. But it's really cool to see how it went from something so small of literally just him out in a shop in the middle of Arkansas putting together this mound to now, obviously having a ton of college professional clients and then even some bigger private facilities.
So let me ask you this. Obviously, you got to throw on the mound, I'm sure, a lot through the wrapping up your playing career. What was the aha moment for you that like, holy crap, we've got something here, and I as a player can understand what I'm doing and how I'm moving?
Yeah, to be honest with you, when I was in high school, that kind of started my journey into trying to optimize myself from, an athletic or a pitching perspective. I wasn't very good early in high school. I didn't throw very hard. I was maybe mid 70s as a sophomore. Made actually a pretty good jump going into my junior year, maybe being mid 80s at that point. Um, so that kind of started my exploration into how to optimize the delivery. And honestly, my first few times getting on the mound, uh, I didn't obviously I didn't know the analytical side of what Newt Force was providing. So it was very basic understanding of like looking at how fast I was moving down the mound. I didn't really understand any of the analytics, but when it started to kind of click for me is when some of the bigger programs started to pick it up. So like obviously Wes Johnson being the pitching coach at Arkansas at the time, he was starting to dig into some of that content, and my dad would tell me I would obviously get to throw on some of the test mounds, and he would say, "Hey, Wes likes to look at this, so maybe you should start to try to improve that." So there's some little things that I would pick up on, but just having such a elementary understanding of analytics and even like data science in general was kind of a road barrier at that time. It wasn't until I got into college, and then obviously I played at the University of Arkansas my freshman year of college. Wes was our pitching coach through that fall, and then Matt Hobbs came in later in that fall. So just being around Matt Hobbs and then several other great minds in terms of analytics and just getting to throw on the mound and learn from like actually a player point of view was really cool. Um, so that's kind of when I started to dive into really, I was trying to optimize myself. So I started taking some of the research in my own hands as well and trying to figure out how I honestly could throw harder on a very personal level. So a lot of the knowledge that I've gained over the years came from a really selfish desire to try to make myself as good as possible. And then it slowly just turned into towards the end of my playing career, really just seeing this as an avenue for a career. Um, Obviously, getting more interested into the strength conditioning side of things, and kind of pairing the two. So it evolved pretty rapidly, but it all started from trying to make myself the best player I possibly could be.
And I think that's every coach and anybody who has to communicate with athletes has that moment in their career at some point where they look back and it's like, man, did I do this wrong, or would I have changed this? And I think that's what makes your experience so cool to dive into. And as we continue to talk about how Newtforce has changed since those times that you were throwing on the mound, I think it's part of it's because you guys are learning from people like Wes, like Matt, like all the pitching coach, John DeRoyne, and all these high level minds that use and sink their teeth in the product. And they're just sending you guys, funneling you guys feedback back. And you're like, yeah, we should probably implement this or implement Y here and try this. And I think it's really cool. And your journey of that, of being able to basically be on the grassroots of as Wes Johnson is sinking his teeth into this is awesome. And it shows kind of how far you guys have come from the data standpoint, and how many strides you've taken, but also how quality the product was at that point in time. I want to talk a little bit. You mentioned the strength and conditioning side. Talk a little bit about your experience postgraduate and being around some college programs and some universities, and how that's helped translate directly into your role today as the lab director.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to start off saying that Newtforce and where it's at now is just a continuous evolution of back and forth with really high level pitching minds. We would not be where we're at now without really good collaboration between, some really good minds in the baseball world, specifically in the pitching world. So that's kind of what has evolved all of this. But in terms of the strength conditioning side of it, I'd say so. I initially got into the specifically strength conditioning side of performance after my junior year of college. So at that point, I was finishing up my playing career. I was kind of looking for the next steps in terms of what I was going to do, for a career. I knew Newtforce was kind of in the background, obviously, but I wanted to figure out ways to tie in performance, not just from purely a pitching mechanic standpoint. So after my junior year of college, that summer, I went and interned at UAB, University of Alabama, Birmingham, under Derek Groomer, who was the head strength conditioning coach for the baseball team, and he also had women's volleyball while he was at UAB. Derek was also at the University of Arkansas during my playing career, so that's kind of how I had that connection there. He was an assistant for the baseball team, so I was very familiar with him. And he did a lot of my programming, honestly, at University of Arkansas. So I had that connection. I went to UAB that summer. That's where I really got to dive into an all-encompassing, essentially worldview of what makes an athlete better. So we dove into, vault force plate jumps. We dove into, velocity-based training in the weight room, all types of different stuff, and then really getting into the functional movement screening and things like that. So that really kind of opened my eyes in terms of it's not all just directly pitching mechanics. Um, there's so much more that goes into developing a well-rounded athlete that can perform at a really high level. So I got to dive into that. After that, I went and finished my undergrad degree at Arkansas State University, and from there, immediately upon graduating, I went and became the assistant strength conditioning coach for the baseball team at LSU. So after UAB, Derek Groomer took the head strength conditioning job for the baseball team at LSU in 2023. And so he, through that internship, kind of offered me the role of being his assistant at LSU. So once I graduated, I got my CSCS quickly after, and then immediately moved to Baton Rouge and began, basically carrying on what we were doing at UAB, but with a lot more resources and at a much higher level with, higher level athletes. Um, just the whole gambit of interns able to help us, all the resources in the world. And at LSU, obviously Wes Johnson was the coach, the pitching coach in 2023. So kind of having that marrying of um, obviously Wes Johnson is an unbelievable pitching mind, Derek Groomer is an unbelievable strength conditioning mind, and then me kind of being kind of in the middle there and being able to take away from both of those. That's where I really started to expand my knowledge of what makes a pitcher really good. And LSU has a Newtforce mound, so we're able to do a ton of testing on the mound and then kind of blend that in with their strength conditioning programming in the weight room. So that's where it really took off. Obviously, we won the national championship that year, and it was just a gambit of things that kind of came together to make that happen. Obviously, really talented players, but also just a coaching staff that was unbelievably talented, and we were all on the same page when it came to um, making these athletes the best they possibly could be. So that's my strength conditioning background. After 2023, that's kind of when I came into my role at Newtforce, and I've tried to bring as much of that high level knowledge as I can to Newtforce, and then try to obviously apply it in the context of our technology.
Yeah, so I'm fascinated because one of the things that makes the Newt Force product so special, and tying it back to your experience in the strength and conditioning world, is the instant feedback you get. You throw a pitch, you see the results, right? And the TVs are right there, and guys are able to communicate, and pitching coaches are able to communicate. Hey, try this, tinker with this. You guys do a ton of in-house evals. We're going to talk about the value of those from different parts of the calendar. How hard is it to kind of balance the dichotomy of a guy wants to come in and make these instantaneous changes, and sometimes probably more likely the adjustments he needs to make is like, you just need to be stronger or you need to be more mobile? And how has that changed the Newt Force product, your view of the Newt Force, and balancing your experiences with also seeing a guy move and just be like, dude, you're just not strong enough, and that's okay, but we can't fix this from just this session today.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a balance of trying to obviously, you know, get better as quickly as possible, but also keeping in mind, the long-term plan. So kind of how I approach it is there's a short-term plan and then there's a more long-term plan of obviously becoming a better athlete or maybe making some changes to their body in terms of mobility, range of motion, things like that. So it really depends on the athlete we're having in. Obviously, if it's a professional athlete, they're going to have a higher level of baseline, strength, capability of just moving well than, a young high schooler that comes in. So if it's a young high schooler, obviously we're going to talk about mechanics a little bit, ground forces, how to, apply these things quickly, even within a session because of that instant feedback. We're gonna do drill work on the Newtforce mound with the Newtforce motion capture. We're gonna be able to verify which drills are actually getting them moving in the right direction in terms of cleaning up some of those mechanics. But then there's also going to be a conversation afterwards of like, hey, if you want to go to the next level, it's going to take a little bit more than just purely working on drill work, to improve your lead leg block or whatever else. It's going to take, you know, you're going to have to get stronger. You're going to have to get more explosive. You're going to have to gain some weight, things like that. Those are common conversations that we're having. But as you move into the higher levels with, say, um, maybe a Power Five college pitcher or something like that, most of the time they're going to have the majority of the tools already within themselves to make some changes pretty rapidly. They just need to be able to pair the objective feedback of getting that ground force and motion capture data back quickly with their internal feeling of how they made that happen. So how we do that is we just obviously we're recording the pitches, displaying it on the monitors, as I'm sure people have seen in videos. And with a basic understanding of what some of the analytics mean, that you'd be surprised how fast athletes can just through their basic understanding improve those metrics with some simple cues. Even with being able to see some of the video in between each pitch, you'd be surprised how fast they can make progress. So it's a balance depending on what level they're at. Obviously, taking into consideration their ability to interpret um, data and cues and things like that is can be a roadblock as well. So you really just have to tie it into the specific athlete, but you can make tremendous progress within a session, but it's important to keep the long-term uh, program in mind.
So let me ask you this. Obviously, we're talking about high level athletes and college programs and professional organizations, which is where your guys' base is in terms of the integrated pitching lab. When you install and pitching coaches and the people that are working with the product start to work with pitchers, what's kind of the instant feedback that you guys get of what the Newtforce product provides to them that makes the largest difference in, I don't want to say an instantaneous way, but like clarifies some things that maybe they had theorized, hypothesized, but like puts it into concrete evidence for them to be like, hey, we've been able to get X, Y, and Z guys better just because this right away gave us a concrete plan.
Yeah, so it can be, we make it extremely simple to start. So there's obviously your ability to generate momentum, like going towards home plate. And then there's obviously the ability to redirect that force through the lead leg, up the kinetic chain, and into the baseball. And obviously there's many links in between, but those are the two big overarching concepts when it comes to ground forces: momentum creation and then deceleration and redirecting that energy up the kinetic chain. So really quickly off the bat, once we explain to coaches these two basic concepts and explain some of the more basic metrics, and we can get into some of those metrics if you'd like later on. But once they get a basic concept of that, and then they're able to pair that with um, their prior knowledge, their experience, things like that, that they can, I've had several coaches text me, within a month or two and say, hey, we've had 3 or 4 guys make pretty tremendous jumps just because we're aware of what specifically they need to work on and they can target it more directly. So the biggest challenge that we see in the pitching world is that a lot of people are working on things blindly, with no objective data of why they're doing something, no ability to track its progress over time. That's really important. That's something we emphasize. And it's something that Wes Johnson says quite a bit. If you're not tracking it, you're probably not going to be able to improve it. You know what I mean? So if you don't have like benchmarks along the way of, hey, is this drill actually making me better? You're probably not going to make as much progress as you could be as if you're actually having some objective feedback there. So that's where I see these programs making the most progress right off the bat. It's not that these coaches don't know how to improve certain aspects of the delivery. They just don't have the technology available to them to verify, monitor, and track if the player is actually making progress on it. So
Yeah,
just giving them those tools is life changing for them a lot of the time.
and that's what I was going to say there, right? Like, I think, at least from being around a lot of college programs, and I think you would agree with this, is most of them understand the concepts and can see it with their eyes of what this guy might need to work on or what is causing this. Having the data to confirm that and accelerate it on a pitch by pitch basis with the technology that we have is, we're not, no coaches out there. I mean, there are some coaches, believe me, that are reinventing the wheel and are chasing things that have made guys better and doing things that are really creative and finding new ways to develop talent. But the reality is the majority of them just need something to quantify and communicate to an athlete on a pitch by pitch instantaneous basis. And that's all they need for guidance. And just that consolidation of information into an accelerated rate is sometimes the difference between them, in the wilderness trying to find different ways to communicate with these guys, and just allows like that screen right next to the mound in half of these pitching labs just being like, hey, you see that? We need to do X, Y, and Z to work on that. Here's a cue. Did it? And then right when he throws that pitch, did it work or did it not? Right. And that's
Yep.
sometimes what probably the most value you guys provide, correct?
Yeah, yeah. And another aspect of that is creating athlete buy-in, right? So when TrackMan came to the market, it was actually able to quantify and objectively tell the athlete, hey, was that pitch harder? Did it have better spin? Did it have better ball flight metrics? That's the same thing we're doing with ground forces, right? So we like to say it's not our opinion anymore, right? You actually have the objective feedback. And then the athlete's able to see, hey, coach was right about that. It made my player velocity go up. It made my lead leg block metrics go up, whatever else. And then that buy-in just feeds itself and it becomes a self-fulfilling loop of helping them to continue to make progress, trust their coach more, and then be able to track what they want to work on more closely and more granularly.
Yeah, so and again, that's so awesome, and it's what makes me such a fan of the product. And I know Dan, would speak the same way about just being on more on the pitching side and hearing from these coaches speak so glowingly about what you guys are able to provide. One of the things that I find fascinating, and I love to do this, is circling the time on the calendar that we're in specifically, and being able to discuss how the time on the calendar impacts player development. When people think of ground force, they think of more velocity, right? Like that's pretty much it's two and two. And there is a large correlation to the two, but there are also different ways to improve pitchers through ground force that aren't just can this guy throw harder. Things like command, things like workload management, and those things. You guys were just out in Tucson, Arizona, and did an in-season assessment. Talk about the value of utilizing the mound in March, April, when you're in the thick of the season, that people might not think about right now, of the product itself, of being more of a like, oh, let's develop stuff. But there is also a value in being able to have guys throw on the mound consistently and doing an assessment in March to be able to make sure the guys are still rolling and developing.
For sure. And that's most important with teams that obviously use the mound, or teams, organizations, whatever you want to call it. Um, it's most valuable with those places where they're using the mound pretty consistently in the off season, because the biggest and most fruitful aspect of doing assessments, as you can call them, during the season is really just to monitor if there's been any big changes, between their early spring and their, mid spring where we're at this point. So the biggest thing that I like to do when it comes to ground forces throughout the season is use it as a check-in point, right? There's so much going on. They're traveling so much. They're midweek bullpens. They may not obviously be throwing with full intent most of the time. So we look at a lot of the time, a lot of transfer-based metrics. So that's looking at how they time up their ground forces, um, how their, back foot is working throughout the delivery, stuff that you can look at without being maximal intent and actually pushing the envelope, stuff that relates to command, obviously efficiency, and then just trying to make sure they stay within the guardrails of where they were at early in the spring. Because one of the biggest markers of someone obviously being more susceptible to injury is if there's really large deviations in their mechanics, right? So if a guy is producing, let's say, 150 pounds of back leg force towards second base, and he does that pretty consistently for all throughout the fall and into the early spring, and then suddenly in the middle of the spring that decreases significantly by 20 to 50 pounds. That's going to be a red flag for us and saying, what is going on? Why is he producing less force in the back leg? And that force is obviously going to other places in the body. The arm may be taking on more stress, things like that. So we use it mainly as monitoring, but we also are looking at some of these transfer times and the sequencing of these ground forces to make sure that they're still working within the bounds that we've got them to prior to the season starting. So it's just a really good way. A lot of teams will do drill work on the mound during the season as well. So it's not that you can't work on mechanics throughout the season, but you just want to be able to verify, are these drills keeping you within the bounds? So they'll do their drill work on the mound to make sure that they're not getting um, too far outside of the ranges that we want them in. Because another aspect of this is all drills are useful in the proper context. So if you do a drill for long enough, it can turn into something that is not useful anymore. So I'll just give a quick example here. Like if you're doing a walking windup, I'm sure most people are familiar with that. That's just like starting off behind the rubber, walking into the rubber, and kind of creating some forward momentum towards home plate. That's a really good drill for teaching, an athlete how to drift well and then be able to time up their back leg load. But if you do that for long enough without actually checking in to see, are those forces timed up well, they can start to drift too much towards home plate and their normal delivery, and then start to lose some of that back leg force just because they've been doing the same drill for so long that it starts to have diminishing or even negative returns. So it's important to check in with those athletes on a consistent basis.
That's awesome, and I love that example that you used there because just in my head, I was just thinking about it. It's like, yeah, it's something that if you're, it's unnatural, right? So if you start to do it, your body's going to start to revert to that movement when it goes through its normal wind up, and making sure you're checking in And as with any drill work, it's about tying it into the mechanics of pitching, right? Tying it into the mechanics of a swing. It's no different in making sure that guys are translating the drill work into the mound and into their mechanics on a day-to-day basis. My question for you that I really am interested in is obviously the college baseball season's a lot. You see guys lose weight, their body changes, there's soreness, there's overall fatigue. How much and how surprised are guys sometimes, like in the scenario of where you guys just were at Arizona? Like, was there anybody that was like surprised that my data or my body is changing as much as it has? And just from like little things, like obviously workload and catch play every day is self explanatory, but the bus ride from A to B or the flight and the bad travel week that you had and sleeping in hotel beds and how that changes your body in terms of its ability to produce consistent, efficient force. Was there anybody that was surprised, or as you've done some in-season assessments, or have you ever been surprised that like, wow, guys do change a lot in this time frame of even a short window of February 14th to March 30th?
Yeah, so I don't know if there is a specific example in Tucson, but I've definitely seen it in our lab. So we've had several professional guys, check in with us on different occasions. And it's similar to the example that I was giving before. That's actually what I was thinking about. He had been doing um, s- um, like a walking windup type drill for so long that he was beginning to overdrift towards home plate, and he was wondering why his velocity had dropped off so much. And um, through looking into the data and the video and things like that, we're just able to see, hey, we got to back off of that. You know, there could be some mobility losses like you're talking about as well. So like sitting in buses, even just increased throwing volume can sometimes affect mobility in different areas of the body. So that's why it's really important to not only do a check in terms of their mechanics, but I think it's really important to check how their body actually is as well. So that's why, specifically in our lab here in Little Rock, we use DARI for our functional movement screenings. So that's able to test range of motion, jump height, explosiveness, um, and just all the main areas. Obviously, we care about specific things for throwers, and Dari does more than just overhand throwers. So we've kind of customized our protocol for that. But it's just as important to make sure that they're not getting outside of the bounds when it comes to, shoulder range of motion, T-spine, range of motion, hip range of motion, things like that. So yes, those can be huge factors, and weight is a huge one, as you just mentioned as well. We did have a couple of instances in Tucson where guys were really surprised that their forces had decreased, um, only to come to find out, obviously through the ground forces, that their body weight had changed pretty significantly. 5 to 10 pounds. That may not seem like much to the average person, but in terms of ground force production and their ability to keep those high levels of force, that can mean the world. Um, Obviously, mass is really tied into how well you can create force. So body weight's a big one. Doing regular check-ins in terms of how their body's able to move. Those are all really big pieces in terms of throughout the season checking in. Yeah.
I think that's a really important PSA, and I know that if there's a high school coach or a small college coach that might not have access to these resources, that there's nothing they can really do except just monitor these things and make sure they're not, becoming an issue. But the reality is like I think, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, a lot of coaches seem to pivot into in-season mode and they forget about the technology and how to utilize those in a developmental way, and making sure that anybody who's listening to this who has access to these resources, it's like, no, it's just as important, if not more important, right? To a large extent, because we can manage the calendar so much more in July and August and get them to be peaked when they're giving 100% effort on the mound and we're doing an assessment. That's the easy time. Yeah, like let's get out there and let's see what this guy does at his best. In season, it's a sprint to a marathon of being ready and making sure you're healthy and managing workload and making sure these things don't change. And it's just so fascinating to hear you discuss the different ways to evaluate guys in season and being able to make sure that these guys are ready to perform every time they step on the mound from not only a health perspective but also a performance perspective. Which brings me to my next question, which is the one that blew my mind as we continued to talk to people about the product, is the ability to quantify command through ground force, and in terms of what you're talking about, a lot of guys, and I know you did some assessments coming out of Tucson. It's like, hey, we can identify through ground force why you might be spraying the baseball a little bit and get you honed in to be able to improve your command in something in a technology that a lot of people see. How can we create more force and move faster? It's like, no, we can also do this to improve your strike throwing ability, right?
Yeah. And I think that's really important for a lot of guys to hear that, especially for myself during my playing career, command was always an issue. And I always just assumed that it was in my head. You know what I mean? Like, I can't throw strikes because, I just assumed it was a mental thing of like not being aggressive enough or just not practicing, throwing to a specific location enough. But we have innumerable circumstances where um, there's actual correlations between ground forces and command. So we look at several things: timing of ground forces as it relates to release, timing of transition from back leg to front leg, and then how well the front leg stabilizes as they come into release. Those are all really important factors in terms of command that I just wasn't aware of, uh, 5, 10 years ago. So it's really honestly kind of like a weight off of their shoulder to realize that there's actually something they can do about their command, that there's something physical that they can actually engage in that will get them more honed in terms of their command rather than just saying, I don't know why I can't throw strikes. Coach keeps telling me to throw more strikes. I can't figure it out. So when we give them the actual tools and the understanding of like, hey, these three metrics are really highly correlated with command. If you improve these, you will more than likely throw more strikes. That's like a weight taken off their shoulders. They're like, okay, that makes sense. And then that actually gives them something to strive for. And then also through our technology, they can check in and make sure they're actually making progress on those things. So one of the big metrics that we like to look at is called YZ transfer back. It has a really high association with command that we've found across all of our athletes. YZ transfer back is the amount of time between peak vertical load, so load down into the mound, and peak horizontal load towards second base. So the closer in time we can make those peaks together, typically the athlete will have better command. And it's anecdotal, but it's also um, proven out really, really strongly in the data as well. So that's something that we've addressed with several athletes um, in Tucson and in other places in our lab and things like that. Um, and it's proved really fruitful. Just if you think about it, timing up your vertical load with your load towards second base creates all of the sequencing necessary for the rest of the delivery to have a higher chance of, working well together and getting you to a consistent release point. So when athletes hear that, the big message is like, that's such a relief that there's actually something that I can do about it, and there's a way to track its progress over time. So yeah, that's one of the big things that we look at.
And it's part it's when I started hearing that, that's 100% part of the reason that I started to fall in love with the product itself. And I'm not saying this to disagree because I'll tie a knot on the end. Command to a certain extent, or worsening command, is a mental thing. But the reason it's a mental thing is because guys don't know how to fix it, right? Like, so exactly what you're talking about, where they realize they don't have the command to be successful because college hitters just don't swing at the same pitches they swung in high school, or professional hitters just don't swing at the same pitches they swung at in college. And it just feels like you're in the wilderness and you're searching and you're starting to feel like it's a you problem that you can't just simply can't fix. But the reality is once you have quantifiable ways to make the progress you need, then you become more confident in your ability to attack hitters the right way, or confident in just your development, which then allows you to get better and just like alleviate those mental concerns that maybe come up. So I think for so long, there's a reason why it is, or it has been deemed as a mental block for a lot of guys. But I think it's just a mental block because it's not like, hey, I want to bench more. Let me get under the bench and just bench every week. Like there's no really quantifiable way. And now with the resources that we have, we can quantify it. And it's awesome for guys in a player development sense.
For sure. And just in the day and age we're in, you can quantify just about everything nowadays. So, and that's kind of the big point of Newtforce is we're trying to quantify as much as possible and then relate that to performance on the field because just quantifying it doesn't actually help you, but relating it to on-field performance is where the real magic happens there. So that
100%,
goes with
100%.
anything though. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And I couldn't agree more. And so as we get into, we're talking obviously in large detail about the product itself. I'm going to pull up a little bit of a my screen here. So, and it's just an assessment that I pulled that we've shared with each other so people can kind of get a sense of what the interface looks like, what you're looking at. I know, Will, you're probably going to be like, oh, the sides cut off and we want to talk about the metrics themselves, but you can kind of see what they are. Kind of walk us through a little bit, and I can kind of handle the cursor here of being able to see the video lined up with the ground force. But just kind of as in your position as the lab director, what are you looking at specifically? What do some of these peaks and valleys mean, and some of the data that you're looking at to kind of put actionable stuff behind what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, for sure. So we'll start off with our green curve there, which is what we call Z. Z force is all vertical force down into the mound. So if you scroll back to the very beginning where the green line is just straight, that's going to be just his body weight. So that's easy to tell that it's just vertical force, right? He's standing still, so it's just going to be his body weight. You'll see as he begins the leg lift, there's going to be a slight bump. That's just him shifting his weight to his back foot and beginning leg lift there. From there, you're going to see a drastic decrease in Z-force, and this is what we call the unweighting phase. So this is the athlete physically getting lighter on the mound, and we find a direct correlation between how much they can unweight during leg lift versus how big or how much they can produce force down into the ground once they begin their load phase. So if you see on the top there, his unweight is not as good as on the bottom there, and you can see the drastic difference between the peaks of those green curves once he does sit into his back leg there. So the more you unweight, the more you're actually able to produce force down into the mount, and that's a um, drastic difference there. So that was one of the things we were working on with this specific athlete. From there, after you reach peak back leg Z, the top of that green curve, you're going to see a transition from back leg to front leg. So from there, and then as you get into lead leg Z, so that second peak there, we want to see that peak be timed up with release. So the top of that green curve for the lead leg, we want to see that timed up with when they're releasing the baseball. So that's another thing we look at in terms of command that I think Coach Johnson at University of Georgia has talked about pretty extensively. The more closely we can get their release to that peak Z, the more likely they are to throw a strike on that particular pitch. And I've seen this in numerous high level athletes, and it works out really well, even in med ball throws, like you'll see on the bottom screen there. Um, so if you think about it just from, you know, a purely um, mechanical point of view, if you're releasing just after you produce maximal force with the lead leg, that's how you're going to get maximum energy transfer into the baseball. If you're releasing before that peak or too far after that peak, that energy is going to dissipate through the body or just not transfer efficiently up the chain and into the baseball. So you're not only going to lose out on command and consistent release opportunities, but also some velocity potential there. So those are the big things that we look at when it comes to Z. So some other things that we like to look at. So we'll go into our red curve here, which is Y. Y is if it's positive, it's forced towards second base. And once it goes negative, that's going to be forced towards home plate. So we like to talk about it as the home plate to second base plane. So you'll see on his back leg there, all of that positive Y force, the more force they can produce for a longer period of time. So we have a metric called ACell impulse. You can kind of see it on the right side of the screen, but it is essentially a metric we use to um, quantify how much momentum they're able to generate towards home plate. That metric is calculated by taking the amount of force they produce towards second base and multiplying that by the amount of time they produce force towards second base. So it's horizontal impulse towards second base. That number is extremely highly associated with um, throwing velocity. So that's a really big metric that we like to look at right off the bat. And you'll see there that you can increase that number by producing more force, or like I said, extending the duration of that force production. Um, and the way we do that for different athletes is going to change depending on what they're already good at. So in this specific example, he was already pretty good at producing force, high levels of force. As you can see, like he didn't have a huge issue with producing high levels of force. We needed to simply extend the duration of his force production towards second base to get that ACell impulse number to where we wanted it to be. So that's a big thing we look at on the back leg. And then once we get into the front leg, looking at Y, um, really quickly off the bat, you can see the sharpness or the roundness of the negative Y curve. So that's going to tell you a lot about how quickly they're able to decelerate on their lead leg. So you'll see on the bottom one, the peak is a lot sharper than on the top one. The top one is at the beginning of a session, and the bottom one is near the end of the session when we had already began to work on some of these things. So you'll see the peak is obviously a lot sharper, which gives us um, the insight that he is decelerating a lot more violently and a lot more efficiently with the lead leg block. We also look at peak force production of the lead leg, the timing of that force production, and several other different metrics there that are associated with not only throwing velocity but also command. And then finally, the one that we're starting to dive into most recently is going to be our blue curve, which is what we call X. X is measuring all force side to side or first to third directions. And that is what we have found significant correlations with velocity, sequencing, things like that. So he was already sequenced pretty well. So you'll see on the top curve at the beginning of his assessment, that blue curve reaches its peak near when the red curve crosses zero. So he was a little bit out of time there. We would ideally want to see that peak in blue happen maybe a few frames after that. So that may be something that we address later on. But we look at that in terms of timing. And then once you get to the front leg, if we look at the bottom video here, you'll see that there is a negative peak X around the time Z and Y also um, peak. So if you'll scroll back just a few frames right there, that's his negative peak X. And then you'll see he quickly returns to zero after that. And that tells me that in terms of side to side direction of the lead leg, he's not wobbling too much with the front leg side to side. The quicker we can get that X to return near zero or kind of stabilize, the better and more likely we are to throw a strike as well. So those are some of the big things that we look at. And that's just a very general overview. We would get more specific depending on the athlete's goals. Um, or what specifically they need to work on. You know, it's different if you're working on throwing velocity or command and things like that. Obviously, they go hand in hand in a lot of things, but you can be a little bit more specific if and chase something more directly if there's a specific goal in mind. So that's a little bit of how we look at ground forces here.
No, that's awesome. And it's funny as listening to you discuss it and talk through it. Again, there are it's the ability to quantify what many have already theorized in some way, right? Like I always talk about hitters and their back leg being Velcro, right? There's now a way to quantify that, right? Like how long are you staying grounded through that back leg and are you leaking out of it, which is going to not only limit your power but also increase your swing and miss because then as again without the quantifiable ways your head moves a little too much, right? Like which can decrease your ability to command the baseball, right? Which is all these things that once we start to see the graph and anybody, and that's the beauty of having the video here is as you're discussing it, and anybody who's listening to this on audio, I recommend you go over to the YouTube and check the graphs in the video. The overlay of the video and the graph, right, is being able to, okay, this is what I would be looking at as a guy who's maybe been in the cage or on the mound with somebody, and then being able to go over here and to the graph side and be like, oh, that's what we're talking about, right? I was right, which is more times than not the really high level pitching coaches. It's just confirms there are theories, but allows them to tell the pitcher, like, hey, this is what we're seeing all in one. And the beauty of the product, which you don't even see here and people can't, we haven't displayed, is the integration of everything, having TrackMan. So then you can correlate your hardest pitch of the day to your ground force and be able to say, hey, we need to get here more. And obviously it's a lot more detailed than we need to get here more, but like being able to show that to the pitcher, because that's what really fires up pitchers, as you know, probably better than anybody. It's like, oh, I threw harder that time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or I got more vert or whatever on that pitch. That's what we're looking for. And I think that's the really cool part about being able to look at the interface right here.
Yeah, for sure. So we like to emphasize that we are not inventing anything new when it comes to pitching mechanics. And like you just said, a lot of times we're just confirming what these high level pitching coaches and pitching minds have already come across. Like we're not inventing new ways to load your back leg. We're not inventing new ways to lead leg block. We're not inventing any of these things. We're just giving you an objective way to measure and improve this over time. And also, like you said, the instant feedback is really important for the player as well to be able to match what they felt on that particular rep with the outcome in an objective way and kind of close the loop on, hey, that felt better. Was it better in terms of the objective feedback? And then, like you also said, we're doing tons of integrations. So we have all of the TrackMan data brought into the same file as the ground forces. We have our instantaneous motion capture now. So you're getting all of those motion capture metrics that you care about between each pitch as well. So you can start to paint the whole picture of was that pitch better, but also what else changed in pursuit of trying to change that one aspect of the delivery. Because, we can go after more back leg force, but if it takes away from their ability to, let's say, get more hip and shoulder separation, it may not be something that we want to continue to push. So it's important to have the whole picture in mind when developing an athlete.
Yeah, no, and that's such a good way that you put it, is being able to understand holistically what the athlete may need that may be different from the theory that this is what we need to fix, right? Which is why, and we have what, 6 data points on the dashboard here. You guys have more than 100. Am I selling it short with saying more than 100 that coaches can interchange? And even to the point with your integrations, you can put pitch velocity up there so that they can see directly in front of them, hey, this is what my pitch velocity was when my data looked like this.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely over 50 different metrics if you include our motion capture, TrackMan metrics, things like that. So there's a lot of data points that you can switch out. These 6 tiles that, like you said, on the right side of the screen are just optional for what the coach wants to display on a pitch by pitch basis. As you can see, you may be able to see the second from the bottom is pelvis angular velocity. So we're looking at pelvis angular velocity. We're looking at player velocity, which is just how fast they move down the mound. We can also throw in some TrackMan metrics there too, if that particular athlete cares about getting more vert on their fastball, like you mentioned. All of these things are tied in together, and this is just another piece to the puzzle in terms of, you know, getting true development.
Yeah, 100%. So the thing that you've kind of tied in here, and we've discussed it a little bit, is we've explained the signals. We just went through and explained the insights. The really important piece that I think every coach is going to want and anybody who utilizes the product is going to need is application, right? Obviously, we've talked about coaches have their own spin on everything and being able to prescribe the drill work. But what, when you look at an athlete, what comes into play when you think about the application and how that continues to improve? Because again, the signals are nice, but without the insights and the application, it's just data, right? And at the end of the day, data just sits in an Excel sheet if it's not utilized properly. So discuss that part of tying the knot. And I don't know if you want me to keep the display up. We can go back, but just the application of improving guys so that it translates to success on the field.
Yeah, so this is the biggest piece of the puzzle, to be honest with you. So there's a lot of places that are collecting a lot of data. What I think Newtforce thrives off of is actually being able to give you some insights and give you a roadmap forward in terms of how you should actually improve these metrics or go about improving the athlete as a whole. So The application piece, you can see here that we use a lot of different med balls. We use different size med balls. We use water bags. We use core velocity belts. We use plyo balls. We use anything you can possibly imagine. There's so many different tools out there that have different effects on the athlete. And this is where a little bit of the experience piece comes in. And being a little bit open-minded can be really valuable in these circumstances. So the way that we use the mound and the way that I've learned so much about pitching in general is just testing things with athletes. So obviously we have all the technology in the world here in our lab. We have ground forces, motion capture, TrackMan, all of that kind of stuff. But just giving the athlete the freedom to kind of test different things, use different implements. Obviously the coach is going to have a decent amount of experience in terms of what works to improve back leg load, what works in terms of getting more hip shoulder separation, whatever else. But giving the athlete a little bit of freedom and say and how they go about that is very, very important. So I've had many athletes actually prove me quite wrong within a session. So I may try to hand them a 6 pound medicine ball. They tell me it feels weird. They want to switch to a 2 pound medicine ball, and then boom, instantly there's much more progress than I initially, you know, got with them. So a lot of times we just have to give the athletes a little more credit than we often do. So just allowing them to experiment, giving them education on some of this stuff is really important as well. So I find that a lot of places um, are hesitant to teach their athletes what a lot of this means because they're afraid they'll get too into the weeds and maybe start to psych themselves out. And I do agree that, that is a possibility, and you have to know the athlete first and foremost to know whether or not that's going to be a risk. But giving them a basic understanding of what they're going after can go a long ways in terms of them making progress. I've had many circumstances where I just pointed out a specific metric to an athlete and said, "Hey, you're below the normative range for where you currently are at your playing level." And the next pitch, just because they were aware of it, they were able to emphasize a little bit more, and it was significantly better just by them being aware of it. You know what I mean? So that's important to keep in mind. But also, I do want to emphasize that Newtforce does have the capability to help any team or organization that is looking for application. We have a number of different drill packages we use for different areas of the delivery. We have a lot of experience in terms of looking at data, applying it to their normal everyday routine. So I think that we at Newtforce do a really good job in terms of relaying that to the coach and then also relaying that to the athlete if necessary. So I think there's kind of two big points there. Allow your athletes to have a little bit of room to explore in the right context. In the middle of a season, you obviously don't want to be trying drastically different things. And then also for teams that don't have big analytics departments that are well versed in the baseball side of things, I think it's really important to consider using Newtforce for, you know, tying those two things together. So that's my job here at Newtforce is to tie in the data with the actual everyday programming and the coaching aspect of it. So those are kind of the two big points that I wanted to make there. And obviously, experience is a big point, big part of it, but also having a decent knowledge and background on how this data is presented and what moves the needle.
Yeah, and ultimately, when it comes to application, it's about the ability to communicate, right? Because again, it doesn't matter if you have all the knowledge in the world if you can't explain it to, let's just say, for college coaches, a 19-year-old kid, right? Like a 19-year-old kid might not understand the language you're even speaking, and what you're saying, and what Newt Force offers is the ability to have the application and be able to communicate that so much more clearly with the integrations or with the packages of drill work and how it correlates to the delivery, where a division 2 coach could be sitting there one day and being like, I know my guy, and just for easy, cool, needs more lead leg block. Okay, well, how would Newt Force teach lead leg block and improve lead leg block? And that's where the application is really tied into. We can theorize, and you might not be a program who has the ability to confirm your theory, right? With ground force and being able to see the graph and the video integrated together. but there's still your eyes and your gut and your experience that tells you this player needs to work on this. There's no better place than to go to the people that are leading the charge in understanding these topics and how would Newtforce apply this to this athlete that needs why.
Yeah, for sure. I I completely agree with you there, and I think that places are getting a lot better at it. And I think the aspect of Newt Force that many people may not know about is that everything we do is a collaboration with the teams, right? So we're not going in and overhauling your whole program. We are very much aware of the high level experience and also just the knowledge base of some of these programs and their coaches. So we never want to just fully take over or anything like that. It's always a collaboration with the coaches. We're just trying to augment and help to catalyze their development. So that's kind of the slogan with Newtforce. We're trying to catalyze development. So we're just trying to give you a more straightforward path to development so that you don't have to do as much of the background work and trying to dig in and learn all of this for yourself for the first time. You can rely on us a little bit to give yourself a head start in terms of all of the years we've spent trying to dig through this data and figure out what matters.
We've both, right? We've both spent a lot of time with high level coaches and everything like that. And even programs that do some of the best development have to trim through the fat of data and technology. I think what you guys offer is very important of like it's a collaboration. We're here to help and assist and clear the fog because like we could install technology, clean our hands, walk away, and just expect you to figure it out on your own. And we'll take that subscription check every month and we ain't going to cry and you don't have to hear from us. But I think that's where you set yourselves apart as a group is like, no, we are, however many programs you guys have across college baseball and professional baseball. It's like we're part of your organization in any way that you want it to be, right? Like if you guys call us and you want us to assist in that and help you out in any way and provide the applications, the insights, and these conversations, we're here to assist in that way because that's the product is useless if it's not tied in with the insights and the applications from the people who, like yourself, understand it and have more experience standing next to that mound than most, right? Like we'll give you most because you're still young. We're still 10 years away from saying anybody, but you have the most experience with the mound and knowledge of the graph. Being able to understand that's really important. So let's tie into a couple quick hitters here. We're rounding out an hour, but I know there's a couple other things that we wanted to hit on and discuss. I think for people that are listening, they might be very intrigued to know this answer. When it comes to assessing pitchers, what are kind of the low hanging fruits that typically, you're going to hear a constant drumbeat of like, guy comes in, he wants to work on this. What is the low hanging fruit that you've been able to help pitchers out quickly when you assess a pitcher in house and being able to make sure those guys get better immediately?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. Kind of like I mentioned early on, there's typically two big camps, and then obviously it gets a lot more granular as you dive into it. There's typically people that need to work on force generation, so like peak force production, and then there's typically people that need to work on the timing of their forces, right? So that those are kind of the two big camps that we see that come in here. So first off, I personally value timing over peak force production. I've just seen way too many cases where athletes are not producing very much peak force, but they're still able to time it up really, really well and produce very high levels of velocity and command. So the first thing I'm looking at is the transfer times, like I alluded to earlier. So YZ transfer back, we're looking at YZ transfer front, maybe Z transfer, and I know those sound like gibberish to anyone that's not familiar with Newtforce data, but I'm looking at transfer times first and foremost and making sure those forces are timed up correctly. Typically, through doing that, if someone's not already timed up well, typically getting those forces to time up better will actually increase their peak force output as well, just because their body's in a more efficient position to actually produce those forces. So I typically look at timing first. That's more prominent within the younger crowds, right? Trying to get those um, the timing of those ground forces in the right spots. But you will see it with some high level athletes as well that can compensate in the other direction. Maybe their timing is not very good at all, but they produce such high levels of force and they're such good athletes that they're able to compensate for that and still perform at a high level. So just timing is what I would say is kind of the lowest hanging fruit in terms of making progress quickly with any athlete. And then once you get the timing correct, as we found in our lab here and all of the analysis that we've been able to do in here is once your timing's correct, that's when you can start to push peak force production. And that's where you see the real change in terms of velocity development.
It's so awesome to hear you discuss that because again, I think back to just giving hitting lessons, right? And so many people want to chase, let's just say, rotational power, exit velocity, and chase those things. And I always felt like it was backwards. Let me then, in tying both of our strength and conditioning experience into this, let's get you synced up where you're able to do what we need you to do on a consistent basis, which is barrel the baseball back up the chute, right? Like if we can do that, and then it's like, hey, man, go get 20 pounds stronger. You're 15 years old, start eating, start lifting, and then come back to me and let's make sure you're still timed up. And then you're a beast, right? It's no different on the pitching side. If we can get you in here and we can sync up your timing to be good enough in that department, now go get stronger and don't lose your timing. That's what, again, we want to talk about player development. I'm not trying to be a simpleton in the explanation. The best athletes, and you know this because you've worked with a lot more of the high level athletes, the best athletes do that the most frequently. Am I right?
Yes, you're exactly right. Yeah. So the prerequisite obviously at the highest level is that these guys are monsters, right? They're really big and really strong. And they also happen to most of the time, especially if they're at the elite level, time things up really well. So it's kind of a hand in hand. Some guys get obsessed with getting bigger and stronger and they kind of hit diminishing returns there. And then other guys say that it doesn't matter and they focus solely on mechanics and things like that, and they hit diminishing returns as well. So a bigger athlete that is timed up well will always be a smaller athlete that is timed up well.
Yes. I love the
You
way you
see that
explained that. That's true.
like in SEC college baseball, you see that in the professional level, like bigger, faster, stronger wins.
Hmm.
If you're assuming that both are on the same level mechanically.
100%. I couldn't. It's not to the point of football where me and you line up and we run Oklahoma drills and I can just pick you up and move you out of the way. But it is true in the sense of when it comes to the highest level of athlete, bigger and stronger, timed up equally compared to bigger or smaller and lighter, and same timing is going to be a little bit better in terms of your performance because your output's going to be a little bit better and
Yeah.
the results are going to translate directly from those. So talk a little bit, obviously, as the lab director, you do a lot of the education and the resources that we're working with programs, but you also have in-house assessments. You guys are expanding your space to be able to have everything operate within one in terms of production, dari, functional movement screens, and then obviously any of the assessments. So talk a little bit about assessments and a little bit of the value of being able to get in there. And I always like that the way you describe it is like you're working in tandem with the athlete to prescribe them with improvements that they can then go back, and you don't have to be in with you every week. It would be great if you could, but it's something where then you can take the drill work home with you and then come back and reassess quarterly, monthly, whatever you decide.
Yeah, for sure. So we're really excited about this. Our current lab space is not big by any means. We're actually moving into a much bigger space that is gonna, like you said, be able to optimize our flow of things a little bit better. So we're gonna have a specific station set up for Dari functional movement screenings that we're gonna be obviously doing a ton of pitchers and baseball players on. But we're also gonna be doing some other sports as well. So we're gonna be providing that with some feedback in terms of strength conditioning, maybe some mobility, things like that. And then obviously we're going to have our pitching tunnel that is going to be fully equipped with the Newtforce Mound integrated with sensor edge pressure plates. So at the loading up by the rubber and down by where you land, there's going to be sensor edge pressure plates integrated into the Newtforce pitching mound that allow you to see a pressure map of the foot synchronized with the ground forces and the motion capture so that you can see throughout the delivery and actually be able to quantify how much pressure they're putting on um, different areas of the foot through loading phase and then into the deceleration or lead leg block phase. So that's a really cool change that we're gonna be adding really soon. Um, we obviously have integrations with TrackMan and Edgertronic cameras, so we're going to have the ability to do a lot more pitch design stuff in our lab as well. And then obviously we're going to open up and expand our ability to help other teams, as well as doing some year-round assessment assessment packages and programs to kind of give athletes an ability to do more regular check-ins and be able to receive feedback on a more consistent basis. So we're really excited about our ability to just expand to help more people and be a little bit more efficient in how we've done things. Because in the past, I've done most of our assessments or even helping a lot of our clients through manually typing out reports by hand and conglomerating that data together in an Excel spreadsheet. We've finally created some tools to where some of that data analysis and the visualization of it is a little bit more automatic, and we can be a little bit more user friendly on that end of things. So be on the lookout for that stuff starting to pop up more within Newtforce, and then obviously our ability to help more clients. We're gonna be going to visit more places and helping them to continue to make progress. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And it's awesome to hear that there's the continuous chase of excellence within the Newtforce product because again, the ground force alone is one that is very valuable and very insightful across player development. The ability to chase, combine all these different things, have in-house assessments, continue to get out to programs and assess what they have going on throughout the calendar, right? I think that's the thing we hit on at the beginning is it's not just an October thing. It's not just a off-season thing. This can be a March thing that helps your program and helps you in terms of your player development, your success on the field each and every week, keeping your guys healthy, which is the most important thing, right? Like I can't emphasize that enough. I know college programs want to keep their guys healthy and have that in mind, and it's really exciting. So the last question I'll ask you, it's a little bit more of a quick hitter. If there's one advice from your perspective that you could kind of offer to pitching coaches or young pitchers in terms of you can term it to ground force, you can plug what you guys do, however you see it, what would it be?
I'd say just being open-minded. I see a lot more um, in the baseball world. There's developing more and more often like camps of ways of looking at things. I think all of these different camps have things to offer, but I think it's important to not get stuck and siloed into one way of thinking. So I've done that in the past. I've gotten down immense rabbit holes, as me and you have talked about in the past, of just ways of looking at things. And those are all valuable, but I would say that it's really important to keep an open mind and reach out to the people that, have been through all of this, have more experience, and just continue to learn from people that are smarter than you. I'm doing that constantly with the programs that we work with, talking to John DeRuin, like we talked about, talking to a lot of these high level coaches and just continuing to expand your knowledge base because you could be doing something and there's probably a better way to do it out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said it there. And the more you talk to high level people and the more you get around these people, the more you realize how far off base you are from ever being an expert in this
Yeah,
field, right? Like if you open your mind and you expand your horizons a little bit in terms of how people are doing things. And I always like to say it was something I learned really, really young and it stuck with me is there's something to learn from everybody, every perspective, everything, even if it's what not to do. Right. Like you might not agree with it, but you can learn something from that and maybe implement that into your application and being able to understand that. So keeping an open mind is definitely, I love that advice
yeah,
for both pitchers, coaches, and everybody. And so with that, obviously we're an hour 10 in here, ton of insights and really excited to continue to expand how we can highlight, assessments and what you guys have going with Newtforce and some of the insights and applications and being able to dive in potentially to a little bit of the film of the guys at Arizona and and doing some film reviews. I'm really excited to sink our teeth into that. Make sure you follow Newtforce Performance on Instagram, Newtforce main page on Instagram, which is just at Newtforce, Newtforce on Twitter as well. We're trying to continue to ramp up the efforts behind the applications and insights of the product, and specifically just pitching development in general. So make sure you're following on all those channels to make sure you catch any of Will's insights and check out what Newtforce has going on, because again, I can't emphasize enough that if you have the operating budget to put a Newtforce integrated lab in there, you're doing yourself a disservice by not doing it. So, Will, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts there as we wrap up the podcast.
Yeah, I just want to say that for any of our existing customers out there or anyone interested in learning about ground forces or player development or anything like that, you guys can always reach out to any of our Newt Force social media pages, inquire about how we're using the mounds. And for any of our customers that currently have any of our systems, feel free to reach out to us. We want to make sure that you win, and our main goal is to see your guys get better, because if y'all are getting better, then, that's a major plus, and that's the whole purpose of our company.
I love it. Perfect way to end the episode. And that will do for this episode of the Baseball Development Hub podcast.